Hello dear students, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is Monday, 8th July 2024, and today we have some important articles from the Hindu, Indian Express newspapers. So all these articles that we are going to discuss are very important for both prelims and mains examination point of view. So in this discussion, we'll try to discuss all of those articles in a very specific and a very detailed manner. And before get into the discussion, let's discuss yesterday given practice question. Yesterday, you all knew that I have given one practice question that is with respect to gharials, right? So gharials are, freshwater crocodiles. So if you look into the first statement, gharials are the saltwater crocodiles. The other thing that you have to be very careful here is the directive word is incorrect. You need to find out incorrect statements from the given options. So first option says that gharials are the saltwater crocodiles found only in India. So what do you think about this first statement? Because earlier also there was a question that was asked in UPSC examination about these gharials, where they found, right? So these gharials, if I can tell you again, that they are freshwater crocodiles. And these freshwater crocodiles are very often found in Chambal River of Madhya Pradesh. Chambal River in Madhya Pradesh is well known for these gharials. So therefore, they are not saltwater crocodiles. And the other thing that you have to understand in the first statement, these gharials are also found in Nepal, not just in India. So they are also found in Nepal, not just in India. So therefore, this statement is incorrect statement. So but the directive word is that they have asked about the incorrect statement. So by this we can eliminate option B. Why? Because first statement is the incorrect statement. If you look into the second statement, we have International Union for Conservation of Nature, and this particular organization actually categorizes different species based on their threat vulnerability. I hope all of you knew about this IUCN, right? So it categorizes different species based on the threat vulnerability. For example, least threatened, threatened, near threatened, vulnerable, and critically vulnerable, extinct in wild, and extinct. So this is how it actually categorizes different species. So when you look into the saltwater crocodile, without any doubt we can say that it is a critically endangered species. Why? Because the numbers of this gharial crocodile, a freshwater crocodile, so their numbers are very less, and they are also located in very few areas. They are endemic to very few rivers or very few regions, and apart from that they are also facing higher threat of extinction. So since they are facing the higher threat of extinction, yes, of course, it is true that they are in the critically endangered category of the IUCN list. So therefore, this statement is correct, but first statement is incorrect. And third statement, this Kukrail Gharial Breeding Center is located in Bhopal. Now this statement is also incorrect because this Kukrail Gharial Breeding Center is located in Uttar Pradesh. It is located in Uttar Pradesh, but not in Bhopal of Madhya Pradesh. So hence this statement is also clearly incorrect. And if you look into the directive of this question, which of the statements given above are incorrect? This is what is asked. So therefore, 1 and 3 are incorrect statements in this question. So correct answer is answer option C, 1 and 3. Now you can look into this brief explanation. So as I have already told you that this gharial is a freshwater crocodile that found in Chambal River. In fact, these gharials very often live in deep and fast flowing rivers. However, unlike alligators or unlike crocodiles, which having the broad snouts, gharials actually possesses a long and slender snout. Right? So if you look into the gharials actually possess a long and slender snout. So that actually looks like this. Okay, and therefore, we get to know that in the first statement it was given that it was a saltwater crocodile. So therefore, the first statement is incorrect because it is a freshwater crocodile. And again, the gharial population mostly confined in India and Nepal, and if you look into the third statement, if the reintroduction proposal is approved, the reptiles, so the gharials are also reptiles, are likely to be brought from the Kokrail Gharial Breeding Center, so that is located near Lucknow of Uttar Pradesh. So this is the explanation for this question. And today I also have a very important question. Why it is very important? Because when we talk about India-China relations, the border dispute or the border conflict has a lot of importance here, right? We all very often discuss the border dispute across LAC between India and China is one of the most crucial bilateral issue. Right? The question is, the line of actual control actually passes through a number of states within India, and you need to identify all those states through which the line of actual control has been passing through, and you have to arrange the states in order from right to left. So that is the question here. So you can go through all these options and select the correct answer and answer this question in the comment section, and I will be providing you the correct answer in the comment section. Okay, now let's proceed on to discuss few important articles for today. The first article that we are going to start this discussion is with the skill gaps that were existing and how these existing skill gaps can be addressed by a data-driven strategy. A comprehensive and a detailed data-driven strategy is very important that could address the skill gaps. This is what the author has been talking about. Now, when you look into India, India is a country with a huge demographic dividend. So in fact, India is a country with the largest number of young population, people who are in the working age, and we can call people in the working age as demographic dividend. So I hope all of you knew about this demographic dividend, and India is a country with a huge demographic dividend. Now, it is very important for economic growth and economic development that we need to utilize the existing workforce, that is the demographic dividend, in a right manner, in a more efficient manner. For that, skill development is very important, right? So upskilling and reskilling of people and vocational training, technical education, so everything comes part of the skill development. Now when we develop skills, one benefit is we appropriately utilize the existing demographic dividend, and it facilitates economic growth as well as the economic development also. And when we develop skills among India's younger population, India's demographic dividend, then we can also substantially boost our manufacturing production, also boost manufacturing and even boost exports. So therefore, key to India's economic growth and economic development lies in more efficient utilization of existing demographic dividend, right? So how we are utilizing the existing demographic dividend is actually decides India's overall economic growth, economic development in the longer periods of time. But currently the concern is that we are not able to upgrade skills of our existing workforce, and that is the problem. Now if you look into the data, around 4% of the total workforce is formally skilled in India, right? So in India, only just 4% of the total workforce have got the formal skills or formal skilling training. So this is significantly less, because when you compare this number with countries like South Korea, so in South Korea around 94% of the total workforce were skilled, and even in countries like Japan around 84% of its total population were skilled, and even China also more than 50% of its population formally skilled. But you can see that in India only 4% of the people were formally skilled, and you can imagine how Indian skilling programs are not actually giving positive result, because only 4% of India's total workforce was skilled. Now in this context, it is very important that we need to have a data-driven strategy, And this data driven strategy could actually plug our existing skill gaps. What are the issues? We need to first identify those issues. So once we get to identify those issues, so we will be undertaking a concerted policy actions. So those concerted policy actions are essentially aimed at skill building among India's workforce, and that is what the author is going to emphasize on. Now, if you look into the data from past few years with respect to skilling, workforce participation, in India, the labor mobilization has been gradually declining, and that is the cause of concern. Right, so there is a very less labor mobilization, and one reason for lack of or declining labor mobilization was because of lack of adequate skills. Now, the college pass outs were not able to get employment or gainful employment opportunities. So once they passed out from their colleges, so they have a less employability. So they have less employability is because they lack adequate skills, and that is the problem. And in fact, World Bank data has been indicating that there is a declining labor mobilization in India. So these labor mobilization rates have been falling from 70% in 1999 to 56% in the recent years. And that is certainly a cause of concern for India. And apart from that, when you look into the high skilled workforce, and the high skilled workforce is very, very important, especially for a country like India, because high skilled workforce are the backbone of technology-led economic growth and economic development. Economic growth and technology-led sectors, this high-skilled workforce is very, very important. But in India, the phenomenon is that the high-skilled workforce is also declining over a period of time, according to the periodic labor force participation survey. So we are not adequately focusing on developing high-skilled workforce, and high-skilled workforce is not just ensures the faster economic growth and economic development in India, but we can also export the high skilled workforce to other countries, because the high skilled workforce are in a huge demand across the world. Right, so that could be a potential source of remittances, potential source of soft power for India, because they would be diaspora in those respective countries. Right, so therefore it is very, very important that we need to focus on developing a high skilled workforce in India. So the concern is that there has been a declining rate of this high skilled workforce or high skilled individuals, and this is a phenomenon that was observed in around 36 states and union territories between 2017 and 2022. And apart from that, the government has been undertaking certain skilling measures, right? So in order to skill the existing workforce. So however, we can say that these skilling programs, so that are being aimed at developing the semi-skilled workers, so they are actually yielding the positive results, because in recent times there is a substantial rise in people who have this semi-skilled who are semi-skilled. Okay, so the semi-skilled workforce has grown significantly with national compound annual growth rate of 59.5% between last 5 years, and that is a thing that should be appreciated from the government side, because it has been giving some positive results, right? So with respect to adequate skilling. But when we talk about some programs which were launched by the government for skilling people, one was Pradhan Mantri Kaushalya Vikas Yojana, right? So Pradhan Mantri Kaushalya Vikas Yojana, and apart from that, Prior Learning Scheme. Prior Learning Scheme was also another scheme that was launched for the skilling of people. And apart from Prior Learning Scheme, there was also another program, right? So Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Grameen Kaushalya Yojana and Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. So these were major and flagship programs. So you can see here Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gramin Kaushal Yojana, right? So these were the major programs when we talk about the skill development in India, right? So these programs have actually contributed for the developing or growth of the semi-skilled workforce through skill training and certification of those skilled workforce. However, these were flagship programs of the government and they are yielding positive results. But with respect to the growth in high skilled workforce, so it has been either stagnated or it has been shrinking. Growth of high skilled workforce has been gradually shrinking, and that is the cause of concern here. And apart from that, there are also existing a formal training gap, right? So despite the semi-skilled workforce has been growing substantially, 72.6% of the workforce, which is aged at 15 to 59 years, still lacks formal vocational or technical training as of 22-23. And in fact, it has come down from 91.9% in 2017-18 to 72% in this year 22-23. And apart from that, the other thing that we need to understand, there is also a huge disparity within rural areas and urban areas, and rural areas still lagging behind with respect to skilling, upskilling, reskilling and vocational training and technical education, and that gaps must be bridged, right? So there is also a rural urban skill disparity that is still existing, like how we talked about digital divide. In a similar sense, this rural urban skill disparity is also existing. So therefore, since there is a noticeable skill intensity disparity between rural and urban areas, so with metropolitan districts hosting skill intensive trade clusters, and this is also another focus area that the government must focus on in rural areas and further enhance skills of people, right? So when government enhances skills of people, so they can find a gainful employment opportunities, and when they have the gainful employment opportunity, then it would change their living standards. It will lead to the betterment of their living standards. There will be social security, social safety nets, income security for those families, right? So we need to look into the skill development in such a holistic manner. And apart from that, the key of this editorial is we need to focus on a data-driven strategy for the skill development. So every time I used to emphasize on evidence-based policy making. So this evidence-based policy making and data-driven policy making is very, very important. Because what happens when we have adequate evidence or adequate data about any policy, then we could better understand what are the shortcomings of a particular policy. Now we can assess and evaluate one policy from the above evidence or given data. Now when we assess the policy, we can come up with appropriate interventions into that particular policy, and these interventions would actually help in further improving those existing policies. And that is where the author has been emphasizing on evidence-based policy making and data-driven policy making. So one example is Andhra Pradesh is conducting skill census among the youth, right? So once it conducts a proper skill census across the state, there will be a fair picture of the youth with skills, right? So they do this skill census and skill mapping. They would identify the number of youth with formal skilling. So therefore, they can attract investments, they can provide employment to the youth, and those youth who are not yet skilled, the government will organize the skilling programs. Government will provide skilling and then give them certification. So not just impart skills, but provide them the required employment opportunities. And apart from employment opportunities, the entrepreneurship opportunities should also be provided to such youth who have received formal skilling. but that can happen only with the data and evidence about the skilling, or when we do skill mapping or skill census of a one particular region, right? So that can be possible with these things. And apart from that, there is also a need for targeted skill mapping. Now if you look into the mapping the current skill landscape, so that actually help the policymakers identify specific areas with skill shortages and also devise the targeted actions. So as I've already told you that when we do this skill mapping, we get to know about the shortcomings or challenges, problems, and the areas where we need to focus more. So thereby, the state governments or the relevant government agencies can come up with appropriate policy interventions, and these appropriate policy interventions are really important. Appropriate policy interventions are really important to bring in some change in the existing policies and provide skilling and employment to more number of youth. So apart from that, it is also important that one size fits all policy must not be adopted with respect to the skill development. Okay, so one size fits all approach should be abandoned when we talk about the skilling. So rather than one size fits all policy, why don't we adopt the state specific skilling programs? Because state specific skilling programs, what happens that each state would have a comprehensive and holistic data, and each state would have a specific requirements with respect to the skilling of workforce, and accordingly the skill development among youth can be done. For example, if I can tell you that coastal states have a lot of potential with respect to the food processing, and hence these coastal states would focus on skilling youth in the food processing sector, and they would also undertake certain measures to promote entrepreneurship within the area of food processing, right? So that is how the state specific skilling programs have to be undertaken. So what is the purpose if with respect to the fish processing centers, or training in fish processing is given in the state of Madhya Pradesh, where it is not having any coast, right? So therefore it is very important that we need to undertake a state specific programs in different states and impart skills based on the requirements of those respective states. And the benefit, the advantage is that we have a state specific data in each of these states, state specific skill requirements, and the youth can be readily employable, and at the same time the skills can also be prioritized as per these states, right? So this is what the author has been suggesting, but the key emphasis is on evidence-based and data-driven policy making, and in this the skill census and skill mapping along with the state-specific skilling programs are very important, and that is what the author has been emphasizing here. So next article that we are going to discuss, so we very often discussed about this, and it is about the carbon resilient or carbon low carbon climate resilient. Okay, see, the development should be focused on, or the development should be based on low carbon future or low carbon emissions. Now what is the relation between carbon and climate change? So do you know the relation between carbon and climate change? So of course, fossil fuels, have you heard about the fossil fuels? Now fossil fuels emit carbon when we burn these fossil fuels, such as crude oil, natural gas. When we burn these fossil fuels, they release carbon into the atmosphere, and this carbon is a greenhouse gas, and it absorbs a lot of heat. So once it absorbs a lot of heat, that increases the temperatures of the earth, and this phenomenon is known as global warming. This phenomenon is known as global warming, right? So this global warming or unprecedented levels of increase in the global temperatures is known as global warming, and global warming in turn contribute to the climate change. And we all knew the consequences of the climate change, right? So climate change, in recent times, heat wave like conditions, and this heat wave like conditions have led to the death of number of people across different parts of India, and even in other parts of the world also. And apart from that, the intensity and the frequency of these disasters, intensity and frequency. Now when I say disasters, it is important that we need to talk about cyclones. Intensity and frequency of these cyclones has also been frequently increasing, especially the Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea, and they very often leaving a huge destruction across these coastal areas. However, in recent times we have made a lot of we have undertaken a lot of measures that would significantly reduces the vulnerability of coastal areas across eastern coast and western coast, but the increasing intensity and frequency of cyclones is particularly a cause of concern. And apart from that, when we talk about the negative impacts of the climate change, very often we have been observing the phenomena like El Nino and La Nina, right? So El Nino and La Nina have been resulting in either recurrent drought or flood-like situation, failure of monsoons, and poor agricultural productivity. And even due to climate change, glacier melting has been taking place, and with glacier melting, the sea has been coming, increasing levels of sea, and storm surges. The water has been entering into the fertile delta plains that impacts agricultural productivity. So all these factors are a cause of concern, right? So but in this context, in order to deal with the global warming and climate change, recently Supreme Court in MK Ranjit Singh and others versus Union of India case. Now this is important case, you just remember this, right? Supreme Court in MK Ranjit Singh and others versus Union of India case so recognized the right against adverse effects of the climate change, and in fact Supreme Court has recognized this as part of Article 14 and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, the right against adverse effects of the climate change. So since Supreme Court has recognized this right is part of Article 14 and Article 21, so it is very important that we need to have a comprehensive legislative framework to make sure that this particular right is not violated. Okay, so therefore it is up to the government to bring a comprehensive law or comprehensive legal framework on specifically dealing with the climate change, and therefore it would not impact the rights of individuals that Supreme Court has recently recognized in this Ranjit Singh versus Union of India and others case, right? So what is the need for such a comprehensive climate framework law? So why we wanted such a comprehensive climate framework law, right? So it is very important that the right to climate protection that Supreme Court has recognized in that particular case, right? So right to be free from the adverse effects of climate change. So it actually requires a legislative backing for the effective implementation of. Without legislative backing, we cannot implement any law, in letter and spirit. For example, we very often talk about citizen charter, right? So we very often talk about this citizen charter, and we also very often talk about the social audit. So both citizen charter and social audit, they don't have the legal backing. So if they were given the legal backing, so we can implement them in a better manner. So we can actually reform the governance, reform administration. We can hold the institutions, organizations, and individuals who are working in those organizations accountable if we give them a statutory backing or clear legal framework. So hence, because of that reason, the author has been demanding that there should be a comprehensive legal framework to protect this particular right that Supreme Court has recently recognized. And apart from that, now when we talk about India's overall development, right? So Indian economy is one of the economy which utilizes energy at a higher scale, a higher degree of energy consumption in India. Since majority of the energy is being derived from the coal, which is a fossil fuel, when we use coal for the production of energy in these thermal power plants, they also releases a lot of carbon, and carbon contributes to climate change, global warming and climate change. And therefore the author has been emphasizing that our development should be low carbon development in the sense that we need to emphasize on renewable energies. Okay, so we need to emphasize on production of energy through these renewable energies, wind energy, solar energy, bioenergy. So these methods have to be emphasized. And apart from that, we need to build a climate resilient future. Now, what does climate resilient future means? So climate resilient future actually means that climate change is a reality. There is no doubt about that. Climate change is a reality. So therefore we need to understand that it is real for now, and hence we need to develop in such a manner that our development, our economic growth should be resilient to the climate change. So therefore we need to emphasize on mitigation and adaptation efforts to the adverse effects of the climate change is very, very important with respect to the climate resilience. And when we talk about such a law for the protection of climate, so it is very important that we that particular law must address the climate vulnerabilities that are existing, and it should also ensure a just energy transition, advancing the phenomenon of social justice, because there are a lot of people who are vulnerable to the negative impact of climate change. So hence we need to identify the vulnerable categories of people, and social justice should actually form a very important part of this. However, there are a number of key features in this proposed climate law. Now, what are those features of this particular climate law? So there should be a procedural framework, a proper procedural framework. Now, when we have a proper procedural framework, it gives us a more clarity. So it will not make the existing provisions of a particular law more and more complex or confusing. Rather, it gives a clarity. So because of that reason, there should be a proper procedural framework, right? So that should establish a well-defined procedures, and these well-defined procedures would be applicable across government levels. So therefore, we can realize the protection against the climate change effects that Supreme Court has recognized right under this Ranjit Singh case, the protection against adverse effects of climate change is actually recognized as part of Article 14 and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So I hope you knew about Article 14 and Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So just write what does Article 14 talks about and what does Article 21 talks about in the comment section. And apart from that, there should be a proper institutional structure. For example, if you look at National Disaster Management Act, now this National Disaster Management Act also has a proper institutional structure, right? So for example, this National Disaster Management Act has a proper framework at the district level, at the state level, and at the central level. So such a proper institutional structure should be established, and such institutional structure will play a very important role in strategizing, prioritizing, and even evaluating and assessing these climate policies regularly. So when we don't have such a decentralized institutional structure across different levels, then there is no purpose even if we bring such a law. So therefore, we need to bring a law so that essentially focuses on protecting people from the adverse effects of the climate change as the Supreme Court directed, but it should have a detailed and a clear procedural framework, and apart from that, it should also have a comprehensive institutional structure as well. And apart from that, we need to focus on development centric approach also, right? For example, we are using carbon. So why we are using carbon? Why don't we immediately stop using fossil fuels which emit carbon into the atmosphere? Because that doesn't take place in this manner, because fossil fuels are very important for India. So why? Because the energy demand has been increasing and economic growth can be fueled by increased use of this energy. Now, as of now, yes, it is true that we have focused on renewable energy resources, but we are not able to meet our energy demand or energy requirements just from the renewable energy resources alone, right? So since this coal is being a conventional energy resource, and it could also provide us a stable supply of energy throughout the years, because of that reason we are still dependent on coal, right? So at the same time we are simultaneously focusing on developing and the growth of the renewable energy resources also, right? So therefore, when we are using coal or when we are using any other fossil fuels, we need to make sure that we must squeeze maximum development from each ton of carbon which is being emitted into the atmosphere, right? So each ton of carbon which is emitted into the atmosphere, we need to squeeze out maximum benefits, right? So therefore, that is the essence for India going ahead, reducing the negative effects of climate change on the people. Now, especially when we talk about the climate change and its goals, we need to mention about the Panchamrit commitments, right? So Panchamrit commitments, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced, right? So under this Panchamrit commitments, India would become net zero by 2070. So that is actually one of the goal, right? So one of the goal is India would become net zero by 2017. So so therefore it is very important that we need to reduce the usage of carbon. We need to depend less on carbon. Even if we use carbon, so we need to get maximum benefit out of the usage of carbon. Now, what should be the institutional mechanisms, and that should be established as part of this comprehensive legal architecture with respect to protection from the climate change. Now, the author has been suggesting that there is a need to set up a low carbon development commission. We need to establish a low carbon development commission. And this low carbon development commission is an independent body, and that particularly deals with the suggestions with respect to low carbon development, right? So this is an independent body, and it actually offers practical solutions for the low carbon growth. Now, how can we achieve economic growth, economic development with less amount of carbon? And how can we further build resilience from the climate change and negative impacts of the climate change at the state level and at the national level? So therefore, that institutional framework must have a low carbon development commission. And apart from that, there is a need for this climate cabinet also. Climate cabinet should also be created as part of this institutional framework. And this particular climate cabinet should be consisting of ministers, chief ministers, and this particularly aims at driving the climate strategy across different government departments. And apart from that, there is also a need for the coordination mechanism. And this coordination mechanism should be an executive committee on climate change with specific legal powers and duties also. However, we must take into account the federal considerations as well when we talk about this, because India is a federal setup. So therefore, we need to take into account this federal considerations as well when we are dealing with this. So therefore, in this context, sub-national engagement with different federal powers, especially different states, is very, very important. So therefore, that law which essentially focuses on protecting people from the adverse effects of the climate change, as the Supreme Court interpreted, this particular law should have a proper framework to regularly engage with the state governments and local governments. When it comes to the climate change, we should not forget the role played by the local governments, panchayats, municipalities. So their role must be emphasized on. So therefore, given their crucial role in number of subjects such as electricity, agriculture, and water management, so we must have a proper engagement with the subnational level. So apart from that, we must build scientific capabilities also, because scientific capabilities actually play a very important role in achieving resilience from the climate change, resilience from the climate change. And with respect to adaptation and mitigation also, building scientific capacity is very, very important. Now, if I can tell you that because of climate change, there is a phenomenon of rising sea levels. Now, with respect to rising sea levels, if rising sea levels has been taking place, the water can easily sweep into the agri fields. So therefore there are seeds, development of some different seeds which can actually grow in saline soils also. So those seeds can actually grow in saline soils, and apart from seeds which grow in saline soils, drought resistant, salinity tolerant seeds can be developed through science and technology. And that is how science and technology actually play a very important role in adaptation and mitigation efforts also. And after that, climate aligned financing is also very, very important. So it actually requires a centrally sponsored schemes, so that should align with climate goals and implement the climate tagging of expenditure. So all these things have to be done to implement that, or make sure that recently recognized right against adverse effects of the climate change should not be violated. And therefore, in order to implement such a law, right, it is very important that we need to have a comprehensive legal framework. So next important article that we are going to discuss is about this Digital Bharat Nidhi. Now we'll understand what exactly is this Digital Bharat Nidhi. So recently, the Department of Telecommunication, especially on July 4, has actually released a draft rules to operationalize this Digital Bharat Nidhi. Now remember that such questions are very, very important for your prelims examination. So therefore, just try to understand this. Department of Telecommunication, it is a nodal agency for the telecommunication operations in India. So that has recently released draft rules for the Digital Bharat Nidhi. Right. So in fact, it is an attempt from the central government to increase telecom connectivity in rural areas, or the rural areas which are as of now not connected with the telecommunication. Right. So what exactly is this Digital Bharat Nidhi? We'll try to understand this. Right. So the actual goal of this Digital Bharat Nidhi is to improve and expand the efforts to connect people to the internet. Now, it is true that the internet penetration in India has been growing at a rapid pace, has been growing at an enormous pace. So it is true. However, there are a number of people who are living in the remote corners of the country still lack access to internet, still lack access to the stable mobile connectivity also, network connectivity also. So therefore, this Digital Bharat Nidhi essentially aimed at improving and expanding efforts to connect people to the internet, especially in remote rural areas. For example, in Northeast, several areas still not connected with the internet, or several areas still not having a proper, stable internet, mobile network. So all these aspects must be dealt with through the Digital Bharat Nidhi. Right. So when we talk about this Digital Bharat Nidhi, so this has been, changes. This has been changing the current Universal Service Obligation Fund. Earlier, there was a Universal Service Obligation Fund, and this Universal Service Obligation Fund has been looking after this particular objective. It has been looking after this particular aim. Right. So you very often come across BharatNet program. Right. So BharatNet program has been essentially undertaken by this Universal Service Obligation Fund. Right. So broadband access to majority of the village panchayats. So that was the BharatNet program. The BharatNet program was essentially launched under the Universal Service Obligation Fund. And therefore, this current Digital Bharat Nidhi will also make a certain changes in this Universal Service Obligation Fund by moving money to help make these services more accessible and much more broader for the majority of the people who are living in the remote rural areas. Now, what is this Universal Service Obligation Fund? Remember that this Universal Service Obligation Fund was created in the year 2003. Now, in this particular year, Universal Service Obligation Fund was created. So, as I've already told you that the objective of Universal Service Obligation Fund was to improve telecom services in different parts of the country. Right, so even as of now in different parts, especially the remote areas of a country, so they're not yet properly connected with they not yet have a proper connectivity. And this Universal Service Obligation Fund is actually a fund, and that aims to improve the connectivity, and that aims to improve telecom services in these remote and rural areas. Right, so this Universal Service Obligation Fund, as I've already told you, that it is a fund. Right, how it is funded, how the funds are coming to this Universal Service Obligation Fund, and in return it improves the connectivity in remote rural areas. So it actually funded by 5% tax on the telecom operators. So we have different telecom operators, right? So Idea, Vodafone, Airtel, Jio. So they are telecom operators. So this Universal Service Obligation Fund is actually funded by 5% tax on telecom operators adjusted gross revenue. So whatever gross revenue that these telecom operators earn, so 5% of the adjusted gross revenue would be used for funding this Universal Service Obligation. Right, so transition to the Digital Bharat Nidhi from the Universal Service Obligation Fund. Now, under this plan, we would shift from the Universal Service Obligation Fund to the Digital Bharat Nidhi. Right, so there will be shift from Universal Service Obligation Fund to the Digital Bharat Nidhi. Now, through this particular change or shift, the government actually hopes to fix problems from the past, and it also wanted to make assets stretch further, or whatever funds we have, so those funds have to be utilized for improving connectivity across rural areas. And the overall objective of this particular thing was to continue to enhance rural telecom services. The Digital Bharat Nidhi also add to. So apart from these things, the Digital Bharat Nidhi will also result in these things. Right, so it promotes research and development in telecommunication technologies. Right, so R&D is very, very important. R&D was earlier neglected by this Universal Service Obligation Fund. So therefore now it will get a new impetus with respect to R&D. It will help with pilot projects and consulting services that will improve the connectivity also over a period of time. And it will also provide telecommunication services. So those telecommunication services will help the underserved groups, unconnected. Right, so earlier these services were not penetrated deep into the remote corners of the country. So therefore the telecommunication services that will actually help these underserved groups like women, people with disabilities, so they should also be financed. And after that, it would also make telecom sector more open to new ideas and technologies made in the country over a period of time. And you can also go through 9 pillars of Digital India, right? So there are a number of pillars for this Digital India program also. Now, how it actually operates, how this Digital Bharat Nidhi actually operates in India. So according to this new proposed rules, the telecom companies will first put their payments into the Consolidated Fund of India. So this 5% of 5% tax that was imposed on these telecom companies, adjusted gross revenues of these telecom companies, 5% would be funded in the Consolidated Fund of India. So then this Digital Bharat Nidhi will then get money from this particular fund, Consolidated Fund of India. The Nidhi, Digital Bharat Nidhi will get money from this fund. Now this operational model actually calls for choosing an administrator, and this administrator would manage the fund, this Digital Bharat Nidhi fund, and hiring this Digital Bharat Nidhi implementers through bidding or direct applications. So after that, they will implement this Digital Bharat Nidhi different programs, projects with the help of the money which is credited in the Digital Bharat Nidhi. So these implementers will carry out different projects according to the Digital Bharat Nidhi rules, and they focus on providing services openly and fairly to everyone. And what are the major goals of this Digital Bharat Nidhi? The major goal of this Digital Bharat Nidhi is to expand the telecom services, as we have already told you about, we have already discussed about that. So it focuses on expanding telecom services, and apart from that, it also make the telecom industry a better place for the technology, innovation and new businesses to start up. And it also wants to break a new ground by using the cutting edge technologies. Remember, it promotes research and development, right? So it would also set up the regulatory sandboxes, and at that particular regulatory sandboxes, new ideas can be tested in a safe setting. And in fact, India's telecom sector will also be more competitive on the global or world stage, and that is because of the standardization and international compliance that has been taking place in recent times. And the next important article is with respect to the antimicrobial resistance. Right. So what does this antimicrobial resistance, which is very often in news or very often discussed about this, right? For example, imagine that one individual is suffering with one particular disease, and that particular individual would take medicine. Okay. So this medicine is known as antibiotic. Okay, so medicine is taken by individual against one particular disease. For example, TB is an example, and one individual is suffering with the TB and he would take medicine, the antibiotic. But over a period of time, because regularly taking up medicine, the TB bacteria develops resistance, and even if individual take medicine, the TB bacteria would not get impacted by that particular medicine, and thereby continues to impact the individual, and over a period of time it will lead to the mortality, or it will lead to the death of individual who infected with the TB. So antimicrobial resistance is a very, very serious problem. Now first and foremost, understand the antimicrobial resistance and its definition. So it is a resistance of microorganism to an antibiotic that was originally effective. For example, the antibiotic or a medicine that was taken to treat TB disease originally effective, but even though it was originally effective, because of number of reasons, or the individual taking up this antibiotic multiple times over a period of time, so it develops resistance. And so that is the antibiotic resistance. Now once it developed this particular resistance, even if the individual takes the medicine, it will not be effective enough to cure this particular disease. Now in this context, why India needs to curb this antibiotic overuse? So antibiotic overuse is responsible for this antimicrobial resistance, right? So India's bacterial disease burden is highest in the world, and a large population also suffers from different diseases like diabetes, heart ailments, cancer, and thereby making them more prone to these infections. And 40% of the children are malnourished and are at the risk of infections, and more drug resistant bacteria is being identified in recent times. And all these factors have made it clear that we must reduce, or we must curb the antibiotic overuse if we wanted to really reduce antimicrobial resistance. Now what is the context of this particular article? So the context is that, can artificial intelligence really help prevent this antimicrobial resistance? So that is the context. The context is that recently researchers have used this artificial intelligence, and through the artificial intelligence they predict around 8 lakh potential antibiotic agents. So the observers or the researchers have said that the fight against antimicrobial resistance is actually gaining a lot of prominence and momentum across the globe. Now, in fact, when we look into the seriousness of the antimicrobial resistance, this antimicrobial resistance has been killing millions of people across the world each year. And in fact, this antimicrobial resistance also have the potential to take us back to the dark ages. Okay, so dark ages in the sense that even a minor diseases becoming pandemics, and they're creating a large scale mortality among the people once they get infected, right? So when common infectious like urinary tract infections or pneumonia were lethal and they can be untreatable. Now see, whenever any individual infected with any disease, so we consult a doctor, and the doctor would suggest us some medication. So if we take medication over a period of time, so we would be recovered from that particular disease. But what if, imagine a condition that you are infected with one disease and you consulted doctor, and doctor given you medication, and even if you use medication and even if you follow all the guidelines that were issued by the doctor, the disease is not treated, right? So if disease is not treated, if disease is not effective to the medication that you are taking up, so you cannot prevent that disease, right? So over a period of time, it will lead to the death of individuals. So that is the kind of a seriousness with this antimicrobial resistance. Now, when this antimicrobial resistance occurs, so whenever germs that causes infection such as bacteria, viruses or fungi, so they actually develop ways to evade the drugs used to treat them. And that is how this antimicrobial resistance actually develops among human beings. And after that, the overuse of antibiotics is also another reason, right? For example, we have poultry farms, we have dairy farming, so where these antibiotics are very often and excessively used to these animals, and we consume animal products. So when we consume animal products, these antibiotics are also reached and settled in human beings, and that's how these antibiotics are, once they reached into the human beings, the bacteria or any other pathogens started developing the resistance against such antibiotics that we consume regularly. Now, how artificial intelligence can be used to discover new antibiotics? So that is very important. Now, when we talk about the bacteria, for example, imagine that there are two bacteria, and these two bacteria constantly fight with each other in different environments, whether it is soil, ocean, human or animal gut, right? So they actually fight regularly with each other, right? So they use tools such as peptides for fighting with each other. They use peptides to fight against each other, and these peptides are shot against each other bacteria. They try to kill them. And therefore, recently, researchers have mined this space for antibiotic peptides and found some hidden gems. And total of 8,63,498 new antimicrobial peptides were predicted, right? So these antimicrobial peptides, so that were released by one bacteria to kill another bacteria, and out of which 90% of which these peptide, some antimicrobial peptides, 90% of these antimicrobial peptides are not known to the not yet known to us. And all these peptides had a same general mechanism of action for killing the other bacteria. So how they kill other bacteria? So they just disrupt cell membranes which protect bacteria from the environment. Okay, so each bacteria have cell membrane, and these peptides would attack the membrane, the cell membrane of other bacteria, right? So to kill the bacteria. And peptide antibiotics effective against bacterial infections also. These peptide antibiotics can be effective against the bacterial infections. Now these peptides could actually be used as antibiotics, right? So researchers have actually synthesized 100 peptides. They synthesized 100 peptides and tested them against 11 diseases, disease causing bacterial strains in laboratory conditions. And in fact, they found that 79 peptides have disrupted the bacterial membranes, and 63 peptides have specifically targeted this antibiotic resistant bacteria. There are some bacteria which are resistant to the antibiotics also. For example, when we talk about TB, so TB is actually resistant to the antibiotics. Now, when we use such antibiotic resistant peptides against those diseases, so we can find out that even the antibiotic resistant bacteria can also be killed by using these antibiotic peptides that are released by the bacteria, such as Escherichia coli and Staphylococcus aureus. So they are the bacteria which are antibiotic resistance. And in fact, it actually allows scientists to review around 8,63,498 peptides and develop antibiotic drugs. And in fact, scientists can also use the existing data set with respect to these antibiotic peptides, and they can create antibiotics against which the bacteria cannot develop any resistance, right? So once we develop antibiotics against which the bacteria cannot develop any resistance, that will greatly help long-term fight against this antimicrobial resistance. However, the next major challenge is creating new antimicrobial resistance which can be more affordable, which can be commercially viable, because it involves technology, especially the sophisticated technology. And when it involves sophisticated technology, it is not easy to produce them in a commercially viable manner or commercially viable method. Right, so once we produce these antibiotics in a commercially viable in an affordable manner for the people, only then we can come to the conclusion that this particular thing of developing antimicrobial resistant bacteria can be the developing resistance to them, but means they're not financially viable. Now see, the thing was that antimicrobial resistance bacteria. Now using these peptides, antimicrobial resistant peptides can be used to kill these bacteria. But developing this particular medicine or developing antibiotics which can actually kill this antimicrobial resistance is not easy. Right, so it involves a lot of technology, and at the same time it also capital intensive. So when we produce the antibiotics which can kill antimicrobial resistant bacteria, only then in a manner which is commercially viable, only then we can ensure that this is a greater reach to the people. Now I've given some causes of this antibiotic resistance. These are some of the causes of antibiotic resistance. For example, overprescription or over usage of these antibiotics, and patients not taking antibiotics as prescribed by the doctor or medical professionals, and unnecessary antibiotics which are being used in agriculture sector, and poor infection control in hospitals and clinics, and poor hygiene and sanitation practices people have, and lack of rapid laboratory tests. All these factors are major causes. However, some steps were taken in India. For example, Chennai Declaration, it promotes the antibiotic stewardship, Red Line campaign, National Action Plan on Antimicrobial Resistance 2017 to 2021. And at the global level also there were some initiatives. For example, UN One Health approach, World Health Organization, aware classification of antibiotics, European Union that banned preventive mass medication in animals using antibiotics or drugs. Right, so these were some methods that were recently taken to prevent this antimicrobial resistance. Right, so that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much.